Okay, we'll get it right eventually. I think we're okay. Okay. All right. So moving along through the mitzvot of Leila Seder. Last night we spoke about the Karata Seder, the Seder plates. Let's now talk about the cups. So the 4 cups of wine, everybody knows that's the mitzvah that we have, one of the central mitzvahs of the Haggadah, right? There is a famous story of a person who I've heard it said about the Rav Chaim Brisk. It may have been somebody else, but it's a famous story where somebody came to the Rav and said, he asked the question, he said, can one fulfill, I can't afford wine. Can I fulfill the mitzvah of the 4 cups with milk? So Rav Chaim said, wait a minute. And he went to a study and he came back and he gave him a sum of money. He said, here you go and purchase wine for your Seder. So after he left, the Rebbe turned to the Rav and said, he just asked for the money that you gave him was much more than he needs to get a bottle of wine. And he said, somebody who comes along and asks if they can fulfill the mitzvah of the 4 cups with milk, that's a sign that they don't have meat for the Seder either. That is the sensitivity of Gedolei Israel. But so talking about the 4 cups, one question that comes up, and it's a common question nowadays, there's always been a question of what type of wine you can use. And the question is, can you use grape juice as well? Generally speaking, we assume throughout the year, throughout Shabbat and Yom Tov, we assume wine and grape juice to be interchangeable. According to most poskim, that's the way it is for the brachot of Brei Pragafen, for Kiddush, for Havdalah, etc. Most poskim are of the opinion that you can use grape juice. It's just as good as using wine. Would there be a difference on Leila Seder? So the answer is that there's a machloket. According to many poskim, that Leila Seder, just like you can make any wine that you could use to make Kiddush, you can use, grape juice we consider to be wine, and therefore you could use grape juice for Seder night. There are those, I think it's brought in the name of Moshe Feinstein, who says that there's a difference on the Seder night, that there's a din of simcha when it comes to the 4 cups of wine. It needs to be an alcoholic beverage, and therefore there is such an opinion. Now, I'll read you here from Plinei Halacha. He's actually quite surprisingly machmer on this. He says the following. He says, he says, b'diavad, you could have the 4 cups with grape juice. B'diavad. Tzarich ladat, he says you should know. Shekasher tiknu chachamim lishtot 4 kosot, when the original takana, the establishment was made about the 4 cups of wine, lo ha'elu b'da'atam she'eshtu mitzanavim. Chachamim couldn't conceive of the fact that you would be drinking grape juice. Why? Ki lo hayta bimehem efsharut leshamel mitzanavim me'eta batzir b'stav. Nowadays, we have all sorts of preservatives and added ingredients and things, and you can make something now and you can keep it for years. But in those days, if you were going to make grape juice, it would have gone, by the time the grape harvest had come until the time of Pesach, it would have gone sour. So we don't find a discussion in Chazal about using grape juice because it wasn't possible. He says, in the times of Chazal, if you look at the Gemara, what is the din? Somebody who was unable to drink wine because they didn't like the taste, it made them feel bad, it gave them headaches, all sorts of things. Chachamim say, you still chayav in the mitzvah of the abakosot. וכן מסופר רבי יהודה ברבי אלי, שהיה צריך לכרוך סודר על ראשו מפסח עד חג השבועות, מחמת כאב הראש שנגרם לו משתיית 4 כוסות. It says about Rabbi Yehuda, he would drink the 4 cups of wine and he would have headaches for the next 7 weeks. He would have to tie something around his head in order to help him relieve the pain. But we don't find that he drank grape juice instead because he didn't have it. It wasn't possible. So if it's going to make you a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit sick, you still have the obligation to fulfill the mitzvah. If it was going to make one ill to the extent that they would have to lie in bed, so then one would be exempt. Then one would be exempt from the mitzvah. But nowadays there's a solution, which is to use grape juice. Certainly, somebody with the wine is going to make you feel ill, so then you should use grape juice. But he says, we understand that the part of the takana was that you're saying the Haggadah, you're telling the story, and wine helps to lift the spirits a little bit as well. And drinking grape juice, says Rav Melamed, would not fulfill the mitzvah in its ideal fashion. Let's put it like that. However, nowadays we have grape juice, which I didn't have once upon a time. Certainly somebody who drinking wine is going to cause them to suffer. It's caused a headache, caused you to be ill. So then then certainly you can go and you can drink grape juice, and that would be fine.
Is there a difference between 5%?
No. Anyway, we'll talk. I mean, the discussion: what's better? Should you use white wine or red wine, etc. And right, but so long as it doesn't matter what the percentage is. So long as it's wine, it's wine. He says, "Gam nashim mitzvot b'shiyat habakosot." Also, women are obligated in the mitzvah of the 4 cups, which again is unusual because it's a mitzvah tasei or midrabanan shazman grama. It's a positive time-bound mitzvah. The mitzvah is to drink 4 cups. Some people think there's a mitzvah to drink 4 cups every day, but there's a mitzvah to drink 4 cups only on the Seder night. And even though it's time-bound, nonetheless, because we say, women are not only that, but women are obligated in the mitzvah of mitzvot of Pesach as well, and therefore they would have to drink the wine. So he says, also for women, the mitzvah ideally is to drink wine, and he brings here in the footnote, certainly for one is pregnant or other things difficult, and is what to rely on to drink grape juice. Mitzvah la'ader v'levcho yain meshubach u'mesamech la'arba kosot. So the mitzvah is you should choose the nicest wine that you have. Yesh ma'ala b'kach shayayin yeh. It's preferable that the wine should be red rather than white. A finer wine, you take the white. You take whichever one is better. And b'diavad yotzim b'kol sug shel yain afilu hu lavan ve'ino meshubach. And b'diavad, whatever it is, even if it's 5% or whatever the wine is, you would still fulfill the mitzvah. Okay. So then the poskim discuss at great length how much wine one has to drink for each of the cups. Truth is, the question divides into 2. The discussion is, number 1, how much wine what's the size of the cup? How much does the cup have to hold? And then there's a second question, which is obviously related to the first, but is how much wine one has to drink. I don't remember. Did we discuss this on the show the other day? I don't know. Well, anyway, we'll go over it. So he says like this: Kadei lekayem et mitzvat arba kosot, o kol shtiyat kos yain shel mitzvah, kagon kiddush havdalah b'kat mazon nisuin, tzarich shekamut hayain shebakos tieh ba'alat chashivut. So we have a din of a kos shel bracha. This is not unique to the 4 cups of wine. Every time we have a mitzvah that's related to a kos, whether it's kiddush, havdalah, or birkat hamazon, when you do over a kos, or at a wedding, so the cup needs to be a significant, it can't be a very, very small cup. It has to have a significant amount. And Chachamim said, what is a significant amount? That's what's called the revi'it alog. Right? The reason it's called revi'it, by the way, is that in the days of the Gemara, they used to dilute the wine. The wine was very, very, very strong, and you would have essentially 1 part wine versus 3 parts water. Nowadays, a wine is not as strong, and if you start diluting, then there's a question how much you dilute. When would it lose the definition of wine? But it was diluted in 1 part to 4, and therefore revi'it, that is a revi'it alog, that is the amount which the cup has to contain. Revi'it alog hu shiur nefach shel beitza v'mechza. So it's the amount of volume of 1.5 eggs. Okay, very good. So how much is there in 1.5 eggs? So there are different calculations which are done. So according to the Rambam and other Rishonim, the amount is 75 milliliters. There's another calculation, what's known today as Shiur of Rabbi Kenigsberg, which is 86 milliliters. But then we have another doubt which came along. Right? Ein shiur zeh muskam al hakol. Then people, a couple of 100 years ago, started to question, are the eggs today the same size as the eggs were in the Talmud, based on all sorts of calculations, all sorts of understandings, and therefore, it was really the Nodab Yehuda, but nowadays what's known as the Shiur Chazon Ish, says that we have to actually double the measurement. So you have essentially today what is considered a revi'it. You have the lenient opinion. You have 3 opinions. You have one opinion that says 75 milliliters. You have another opinion that says 86. And then you have another opinion that says 150. And that's what's known as the Shiur Chazon Ish. Do we have to have a massive cup that has 150 in order to fulfill the mitzvah of arba kosot? So says Rami Lamed, really we can go by the lenient opinion. That is the way the Sephardi poskim hold, and many of the Ashkenazi poskim as well. Rabim miyotzei Ashkenaz noagim שבמצוות שיסוד חיובן מן התורה, כדוגמת קידוש בליל שבת והבדלה, לכתחילה חושבים לדעת המחמא. This is what the Mishnah Berurah says. He says that when we have a mitzvah, we have to, it depends. If it's a mitzvah d'oraita, it's a mitzvah whose foundation is a mitzvah d'oraita, so then you would go, we say Sveik Torah Lachmir, and therefore you go by the larger size, which is 150. If it is a mitzvah midivrei chachamim, mitzvah midrabanan, so we say Sveik Rabbanan Lakel, and then we go by the smaller size. So based on that, that's what the Mishnah Berurah says regarding Kiddush, regarding a number of things. So based on that, the 4 cups of wine is certainly a mitzvah Rabbanan, according to everybody, and therefore it would be enough to go by the smaller measurement. Now, there are those who say the 4 cups of wine is the Rabbanan, but the first cup of wine is not just from the 4 cups. The first cup of wine is Kiddush. Okay, there's discussion whether Kiddush, the truth is whether Kiddush on Yom Tov is Doraita or Rabbanan, but if the first night of Pesach falls out on Shabbat, right? Kiddush on Shabbat is certainly is a sort of Doraita, even though Kiddush on wine is only the Rabbanan, meaning midoraita, you could make Kiddush without wine at all. But again, what's the language here? It says mitzvot sheyesod chiyuvan min haTorah, that it's based on a doraita chiyuv, and therefore there are those who say you want to be makel on the last 3 cups because that's midrabanan, but the first cup is related to Kiddush as well, and therefore there's a svara to say that one should be machmer and one should have the bigger share when one drinks the first cup of wine. But even according to that would only apply to the one who's making Kiddush. There are some families or some that are where everybody says Kiddush and everybody says the brachot. In many, many places, it's just the person who is leading the Seder. We spoke last night about the Seder plate. Just the person who's leading the Seder who says Kiddush, who says the brachot, etc. Now, when you have Kiddush, again, on an ordinary Shabbat, not everybody is required to drink from the Kiddush. It's only the person who's, and many people like to, and and many people do, and there are reasons why, but nobody else has a chiyuv so long as the one who made Kiddush drank enough. So on Seder night, one person is making Kiddush, and he's drinking because of the Kiddush, and also because of the 4 cups of wine, but everybody else is making sure to drink, not necessarily because of Kiddush, only because of the 4 cups of wine. So the point is, even if one wants to be machmir, and one wants to say that the first cup is related to Kiddush, which is related to Doraita, and therefore has to be a Shur Chazon Ish, that would only apply to the one who's making Kiddush. That wouldn't apply to everybody else. And the smaller measurement of 86 mils would suffice.
That size of the cup. You have to drink both coats.
Yeah.
How much of that you have to drink?
So you have to drink Rov Kos. So then the question is, we'll talk about it tomorrow. The question is, what happens if you have a bigger cup? So if your cup contains, 200 mils, okay, so do you have to have most of the Revit, or do you have to have most of the cup? So that's also a machloket Rishonim. Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha, Omer, Tzakash Baruch Hu, Zakot Yisrael,